Okay, this is the May 19th, 2015 meeting where City Planner Wayne Marshall, who, wow, that guy, I mean, he just really has no empathy. There's just something really wrong with him. Great worker, totally focused on getting his job done and dedicated to it, and no compassion and no care for residents and flooding them, and just economic development all the way. Anyway, so this is 10F, first reading on proposed amendments to the City Code of Ordinance, which incorporates the federally defined flood maps within the city. So they're dancing around, they're talking about the harbor, but Seaview Terrace is the one that's really getting, where there was, before these new flood maps come out, there's, I think, 2 properties in the flood zone A, maybe mine, and I'm not sure, maybe my neighbor. And now, out of the 12 homes on Seaview Terrace, 9 or 10 of them are now going to be in flood zone A. So they don't even mention Seaview Terrace here. Mike Hurley starts talking about getting flood insurance if you were up on Congress Street, but there's not any flood zone there. So anyway, and then so Wayne Marshall here is talking about, in the past, homeowners that had to get flood insurance because they had to get a mortgage and their insurance companies demanded it, were able to appeal and try and get their house reassessed to get it out of being in a flood zone. And it was easier to do back then because the maps weren't so good. But Wayne's saying here now, like, it's next to impossible. You will not win. And this is, Hurley wants to get an appeal on Seaview Terrace. So here's a guy who last year was saying he hates Seaview Terrace, he's sick of us, he wishes we just buy it back and do what we want. Now he's turning around and wanting to spend taxpayer dollars to try and get these new properties on Seaview Terrace out of the flood zone A. And the only reason for that is got to be because for the hospital to take it over and be able to build on it. So he wants to use taxpayer money to get these properties out of a flood zone A, and then the hospital can take it through economic development, that 5204, if inverse condemnation, where we get flooded and destroyed, doesn't take us first, and then the hospital will be able to build on it. Otherwise, being under a flood zone A, there's going to be all permitting, it's going to be very expensive, it won't be worth their while. So clearly Hurley's trying to pass the buck on to the resident to get all that taken care of before we get taken over. I know it. Here we go.
From some of the rate increases that are going to come in through the FEMA program as being a new policyholder.
Do many homes, let's say you're up on Congress Street, would you have flood insurance naturally or no?
Not on Congress Street.
That's what I mean. My point is, if you weren't in a floodplain, you would think, why would I need flood insurance? So you don't have it. But
I think if you're outside a flood zone, what you would need to weigh is what your cost of a policy is, what the likelihood of a loss is from you.
Almost $4,000 for my flood
insurance. What the amount of claim is and how frequently it's going to benefit you.
And I don't have a
mortgage. Do they have the ability to identify the property owners that would be very happy to hear that information?
Not really. I'll say
right. Are we allowed to convey that to them directly?
What I don't know right up front is how many people who...
FEMA is saying that if you were previously a policyholder of flood insurance, when the new firm maps come out, you'll receive like a 25% discount. I don't know about that. I grandfathered in, and I'm up to like $3,800, almost $4,000 for flood insurance. And as I said, I don't even have a mortgage. I just carry it because all the water that the city's forcing to us. 5 inches can take us out.
Our property owners to really, I'll say right.
Are we allowed to convey that to them directly?
What I don't know right up front is how many people who are property owners today that may be in the flood zone that have homeowners policies. I don't know. We don't have information at our disposal that says Mary has one, that Eric doesn't, and that Walter does, and that Mike doesn't. even though all 4 of you may be in the flood zone. There's nothing that tells us that, because as well is that if you own your
But it's a pretty minimal amount of houses in general, isn't it?
I'd say, I don't have a
I
specific
mean, we're under
number.
100 here.
I'd say that there's probably greater than 100 number of homes that are actually in the flood zone in Belfast.
I guess if I have issues up where I am, the city's in trouble.
Me too, right. You mentioned your friend with who could be greatly impacted. Didn't you mention in your write-up that there could be an appeal process?
Yes.
Didn't you mention in your write-up that there could be an appeal process?
Yes. There's 2 potential appeal processes, and I'm going to do the simple one first. And this is something that a lot of property owners have done in Belfast, which I think is going to have a lot less viability in the future because of the accuracy of the new maps. Because when you looked at these old maps, I can't exactly tell you where some of these lines are. And if you look at the old maps, they even have roads wrong. They don't have a lot of roads on them. There's a lot of points that are missing. So what you used to be able to get was called a letter of map adjustment, where what you'd do is you'd hire a surveyor to go out, and so the map would tell you it's elevation 16. You'd have a surveyor go out and take a survey that says, no, your house is actually at 19. And so if you're 19, what you then do is map what's called this letter of map adjustment, a LOMA, send that away to FEMA. If they approve the information, then basically they will recognize elevation 19 for your property rather than 16 as shown on the map. And we have, I think, 7 people in Belfast that have obtained LOMAs between 1990 and today. They're listed on the flood FEMA's information. We also had one other one that's called a LOMAR, a letter of map revision. The only party in Belfast that's ever obtained a LOMAR since 1990 has been Hannaford. And Hannaford, and if you want to look at it, I've got a nice report that's thicker than most would ever want to ever take a look at. It's 3.5 inches or so in depth. That where Hannaford did a analysis because their parking lot, not because their building, but because their parking lot was in the flood zone when they were doing their expansion in 2005, 2006. So what they were able to do is that they showed that they're able to do water detention in that pond that's in front of the parking lot. They said, and because of such, both the DEP said it would then pass the stormwater tests, and then FEMA, after a 180-day process, said, yes, we will recognize this as a letter of map revision. So now if you look, that area is no longer identified as being a flood zone because of the letter of map revision that Hannaford obtained. So there is the potential of an individual property owner potentially pursuing a LOMA, letter of map adjustment, as well as the municipality could choose, or a group of property owners could choose to pursue a LOMAR. And that's basically the equivalent of the appeals process that are currently ongoing in Rockland and Camden. Instead of doing it after the fact, they're trying to change the maps before they go into effect. In Belfast, because there were not vast areas that were adversely impacted by a great rise in elevation, we thought it would be better if there were any appeals done basically through the LOMAR process. It would be post the adoption of the maps, so that there are a great number of homeowners in Belfast, particularly along the coast, who can take advantage of the change in the maps, as well as one such as the Front Street Shipyard, and to have that in effect so they can go forward with their construction. As noted before, the Front Street Shipyard, there's a good likelihood that they're building 6 when it is constructed by raising the ground level of the building about a foot and a half, that they will be completely out of the flood zone. And that'll have a great savings to them in comparison to what they experience on flood insurance costs on building number 5. Okay. So when you put the 2 together, we thought it would better to go forward at this point, as we recommended to you back in February when we had the workshop, in which we're now coming for you today. And then if there are revisions, to look to them post the adoption process.
Okay. One more quickie, I hope, is on your map 1, flood zone map, there are a number of the purple, or AE zone maybe, dotted lines, often where roads are or something. Can you explain what those dotted lines are and how on the map number 1? They're tiny purple dotted lines.
Oh, the purple dotted lines? Those are mostly right-of-ways. You're talking about the long corridors?
Well, there are also
Like
some
one-
small roads or roadways.
Ones like this.
Yeah, yeah. And also the small roadways that are dotted.
Yeah, those are probably, I'd say a lot of those are probably transmission corridors, but some of those are probably private roads.
Right, they are. But what is the flood zone effect on dotted lines as opposed to?
Don't, that's just two purples coming together on one map.
Thank you. Excellent. May I move approval of the or acceptance of the FEMA maps as presented to us?
I would suggest doing it as the first reading of
first
proposed
reading.
amendments to the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 78 floods.
Second for discussion.
Yes, that.
So, to follow up on this Loma, after that last storm, just because in the past we've heard so much about how terrible it is on Seaview Terrace,
Here we
after I
go.
had spent 7 hours in my basement pumping it like crazy, I drove over to Seaview Terrace just to see how terrible it was, and it was calm, and it wasn't flooded, and I thought that they are making, so I'm not happy with this strip they've put in there, because I just don't think it's true. I think it's wrong.
The forcing flows all behind the backyards. You can't see it from the road. I mean, it crosses into under the road, but the majority of it passes in through the backyards that Hurley can't see. And he has never come to my house to look at the water cruising through my backyard. So he's evil. And so he'll talk about, yeah. I mean, for him to constantly keep battering us. So he starts talking about he doesn't believe Seaview Terrace homes should be under the flood zone A.
And Wayne said to me, well, Mike, what about all the rest of them? And looking at this blue hodgepodge of a map, I don't know about the rest of them. But to me, the likelihood that Seaview Terrace is going to flood the way, to the extent that people should be paying huge amounts in flood insurance, is to me worthy of at least that one. The city looking at it. And Wayne, did you just outline what the cost would be on? In his report, he said it could be costly. Then he told me some numbers that didn't sound costly at all.
This is,
I'm going to back this up.
Crazy. I drove over to Seaview Terrace just to see how terrible it was, and it was calm, and it wasn't flooded, and I thought that they are making, so I'm not happy with this strip they've put in there, because I just don't think it's true. I think it's wrong. And Wayne said to me, well, Mike, what about all the rest of them? And looking at this blue hodgepodge of a map, I don't know about the rest of them. But to me, the likelihood that Seaview Terrace is going to flood the way...
Okay, so this is Seaview Terrace. Where's my house? Jeez, what is this? This must be the top of the street. I don't know. Doesn't even look like Seaview Terrace.
to the extent that people should be paying huge amounts in flood insurance, is to me worthy of at least that one, the city looking at it and weighing. Did you just outline that what the cost would be on? In his report, he said it could be costly. Then he told me some numbers that didn't sound costly at all.
This is the Seaview Terrace area. Actually, it's supposed to be on Seaview Terrace, not White Street.
And mind you, no one on Seaview Terrace is asking for this reevaluation of the flood zone A. Hurley's just taking it up on his own because he's concerned for Seaview Terrace residents? I don't think so.
If you look at the pencil lines, the thin lines, that's the extent of the current flood zone as shown on the 1990 maps.
Mm-hmm.
What you see in the yellowish color is what is now subject to the 2015 maps. You can get a little better sense of this, and I apologize for the colors, but this is what was sent. But you can see the aerial photo underneath it, and you can see where the houses are. This is what would be expected. Some of the houses are really right on the cusp of not being in because what people did is they mounded them up for their foundations, drain water away from them, just like good people should do with their houses. So one of the things that occurs with the flood zone, if a portion of your house is in the flood zone, all of your house is in the flood zone. That's the way that the law reads. And so when you look in this one area, there's probably 7 houses in along the flood zone, all of your house is in the flood zone. That's the way that the law reads. And so when you look in this one area, there's probably 7 houses in along Seaview that are probably in the flood zone. You look today, probably 3. When we were going forward and looking at doing some work, I asked for a quote from Ransom Consulting, who is doing work for the city of Belfast on brownfields projects, who also does this type of work. What would be the cost to both do an examination to determine are the flood maps, is the data that was put into the flood maps basically accurate? And secondly, what would be the cost to file a LOMAR process? They estimated the cost to do the initial analysis at about $2,500, and the LOMAR cost could be $10,000 or greater. The one other one I would note down here is right now we are currently working with Warwick County General Hospital. See, this is off the tip of this. There's a small little thread of a storm, a drainage swale that comes up to where the hospital wants to build their new building, and that makes all their new building in the flood zone, which they themselves need to process and go through a LOMAR process to take their building out of the flood zone. If I looked at it, it would be narrower than any one of your desks is the drainage swale that goes up, and it's an area that's no longer than the length of this room, but because that portion of the building it's in, it's like all the buildings in. And if all of it's building in, it means that they can't build it the way they intended to build it with their foundation system. So what they're going to try and do is to basically fill that drainage swale, take all of it out through a LOMAR process.
That drainage swale that he's talking about is actually man-made from the city. It runs from White Street, the bottom half of White Street. Up on the top, double culverts take it down through Mid-Coast Mental Health and Tall Pines down to the top of Seaview Terrace. And on the bottom half of White Street, they dug this ditch to come across behind the annex and then also into the Seaview Terrace stream, or whatever you want to call it. So the city's working with the hospital because they're the ones who built this ditch. And now the city, the annex is trying to get built, and that tip of the building is in the flood ditch that they dug, drainage ditch that they dug. So So now they're going to fill it in to try and get out of the flood zone and push the ditch back a little bit, still sending it to Seaview Terrace. And now, so that'll start costing it like $15,000 to do this Lomar, whatever he called it. And you'll hear Hurley say, well, maybe we can get the hospital to share the cost to get Seaview Terrace in on it. And why would he do that? Why would the hospital want to share the cost? Because the hospital is going to be taking Seaview Terrace.
So there may be some opportunity to work collaboratively with someone such as the hospital in this type of effort, if the council would have an interest, but it is costly. I'm not going to try and speak, $15,000 plus minus dollars, should it be warranted, is not small money.
To have the taxpayers pay for it.
I can't remember what we were, back in November or something, we were talking about the possibility of mapping this whole water going through inside the bypass. And I think at the time it was like 45 or 50,000, and we've pretty much decided not to do that.
How about just ask Bob Richards?
So I thought 2,500 sounded like a bargain, to tell you the truth.
2,500 is step one.
Yeah. You don't get to step two if the step one isn't good.
You have to do step one. Lets you know.
You don't get to step two if the step one isn't good.
You have to do step one. Lets you know if it's even worth pursuing.
Well,
step two is that when you actually go through the entire process to put the Lomar application together, which is all detailed engineering analysis.
And and I don't know what flood insurance costs people, but I'm going to bet you 2,500 is.
It's not the 2,500. It's the 10 to 15.
Well, I understand, but
He's manipulating.
all these houses are going to have to start paying large amounts of money for flood insurance. So,
Especially if you have a mortgage on them.
So that's really on your end. I mean, if you would like to pursue such, I'll leave it at that. I mean, if it's your interest, I'll make a suggestion.
Okay, Joe.
I'm just going to add, the federal government defines these zones, and then they tell us we have to adopt them, unless we want to appeal them. If we appeal on behalf of one set of neighbors, I'm sure I'm going to find another neighbor walking into my office and say, will you appeal on my behalf as well? And it's just a practical reality of it. And that's all I know about floodplain right there.
but on the other hand, anybody can appeal, is what you're saying.
Yes.
And just what's my motivation?
Yeah.
These same guys got it completely wrong on the tugboat building. Those people spent tens of thousands of dollars to lift their building out, and now it's back down below where they where they lifted it from. I think they would have loved to know that. Hey,
I will note, though, that there's a lot of things that aren't taken into consideration in the flood elevation. They do not take into effect anything that has to do with sea level rise, whether people believe in it or not believe in it. Personally, I believe it's science, and we should believe science. And as even you recommended, Mike, not even you, but I apologize for that, but as you recommended, Mike, is that we're looking at doing a sea level assessment on Front Street. Partly because we have concerns is about what that particularly low level area with so much commerce is being adjacent to the shore. This is one area. This area, and if you continue it up a little bit further onto White Street, most of the ones between here and White Street is wetland areas that likely cannot be developed. There's probably one or two houses in along White Street that would be in a similar position to this. But this probably has the greatest accumulation of houses in one area.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do I have a motion to make this the first reading?
we have a motion and a second, and I just would add a final comment, which is we have time to think about this. I would I'm not going to just forget about it. So
He's not going to forget about
take it
it.
to a vote, I guess.
You Made the motion?
No, John did, I second.
Okay. Take it to a vote. All in favor? Let's vote. Thank you, Lenny.
And this would be coming back for second reading on your second meeting in June, so we have ample time to do public hearing.
Thank you.
This.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you heard it in this meeting or if it's in the other meeting, but Wayne Marshall is who. Anyway, he says that these new firm maps are almost exact. So he told Hurley that to go to these expenses to try and get this appealed is really a loss because it's going to be that exact. But Hurley's pushing it. And it's not for concern for residents that are going to have to pay flood insurance.